on the subject of webcams, body-worn cameras, security cameras, dash cams, and all the other things that we accidentally get a hold of information from. Remember, the first bias on these things is that the subject matter that you're attempting to extract from these cameras is never the subject of the person who set up the camera, owns it, operates it, or is using it at the time in most of these cases because it's an incidental recording. A security camera, even though its job is to look out at the road in front of you or outside of your building, wasn't placed there specifically to record somebody shooting somebody in Oregon. Okay, so I'm going to do this video as a as a thought experiment in choosing the ultimate, we'll call it a truther cam if you want to, but really a proper camera to record what's going on. And the trade-offs that people don't like acknowledging because it gets in the way of them pushing whatever conclusion they have, their opinion. So here we go. An ideal camera would somehow do the following. Have a ridiculously high resolution. We have those. They have higher resolution than your eyes can work with if you're looking at a screen that's a little over a foot across at arm's length. They're actually better than eyes. Next, it would compress the video so that it could take up less space, but compress it not losslessly, but in an adequate way that would be acceptable so that the only time it would screw up, maybe, is during fast motion. That's tolerable. The reason for the high resolution is very simple. If it's low resolution, I can't do anything with it. If it's high res, even if it's kind of messed up, I can kind of fix it, and even if it screws up motion, I can grab the frames that have no blurring or distortion and eke out what the object was, even if I can't tell you what it was doing. Now we get to the next point. It should have a ridiculously good compressor routine that makes it to where, if there is fast motion, if it can grab the fast motion, it tries to retain it, maybe at the loss of quality, and or storing it in full resolution and just requiring that it store it uncompressed. Now this is a bit much to ask, but some cameras already do that. The next characteristic is it needs to be cheap. Not because we want it to be cheaply made or even low cost, but because cheap stuff is readily available. It means it'll be made from parts that are probably repurposed from other sources. My joke about using a Barbie cam, for instance. At one time you could get a toy, it was a Barbie, that had a camera in it. Well, it's useless. Well, no, they were all over the place, and people put them out at yard sales for about 2 years. People got done with their toys, and you had this. At one time, you could get a greeting card you could record your own message on. Well, it made a really good tiny recorder. It was a digital recorder. So, readily available, very high resolution, capable. And if there's motion, it's acceptable if it doesn't get every detail. But it should at least try to grab at least one keyframe in high res if it's able to do it. Now this is a lot to ask for, but it's not something that would also be expensive or hard to find. You find these accidentally used for very specific purposes. Weather cams. Cameras that are designed to point out your window or hang up on the roof and be under a little cover that are supposed to look out at clouds all day generally do a ridiculously good job compressing things because if nothing changes, they just show the same static image right here and then say refer to the previous image until something changes. That's temporal compression, effectively. It compresses things based on the idea that if things don't change, don't bother recording them. This is also how security cameras work. The uncompressed data is often compressed only enough to get it to work as a small file size, but keep as much resolution as possible. If I move my hand this way, it can record a copy of my hand and dynamically change it and cheat, or it can record that there's very little differences, but record those differences as a separate file, and then integrate it into a stream of data. If a gnat flies by me, like it did in one UFO video, I may not be able to freeze frame the fact that it was a damn bug, but I can definitely figure out that it was very close to the camera because of depth of field and focal lengths. And now we get to the next part. Unless you're using a body-worn camera like police, the focal length is going to be very important. With body-worn cameras, it's only supposed to record mostly the audio and try to get an idea of the situation. It's not supposed to be incredibly precise because that's not necessary. Out of an entire year of using a body-worn camera, a police officer will on average have 5 minutes of video that needs to be recovered. That's it. That means that they hit a button as a panic button. Yes, it has a 30-second spool-up time with no audio, which is insanely stupid, and there is no technical reason for that. That's why I don't think you should use a cop-based body-worn camera. So what would the ideal camera be as far as focal length for us, normal people? There is a method for getting ridiculously good depth of field. That means things close up and far away will be in focus. That requires that you use literally the cheapest and shittiest lens possible. The lens is tiny, it requires way too much light, or you have to use a ridiculously sensitive sensor or film in the old days. Or you use a pinhole camera. Now these end up being the spy cameras you see advertised everywhere. Now the next criteria, because we want to be able to record for a year if we only need 5 minutes of data. Well, we need to record a whole night or a whole day, or let's say 8 hours of recording, and be able to catch that burglar. Or we need to be able to record that wonderful sunset and then the lightning bolt out of the blue so we get a really cool screen shot so we can use it for our desktop wallpaper. To make this usable for everything, including catching the difference between a strobe flash from a airplane, not a helicopter, and or the rivulating effect off of a window caused by a helicopter flying by with a real honest-to-goodness strobe off of a building with really gold-covered windows. We would need a camera that can work in really low light, get a really good depth of field, and record instants that are very short like that. Now we're stuck trying to either get a really high-resolution, high-quality camera or just, well, let's just use cell phones. And now we get to the point. It can't be a cell phone. It has to be a dedicated camera. It has to be a camera that you'd wear all the time, you keep with you all the time, that you can hit a button and immediately starts recording an audio and video from a single button hit. We'll see also Casey Neistat's experiment of making a software routine that would do that when you press the camera against your chest, not looking anywhere, and just recorded things raw by pressing the entire faceplate. The default behavior was to start recording, unintentionally making maybe the best possible instant recorder you could. But what's the other characteristic we're needing here? Well, we want to store 8 hours or 8 seconds. We need to have storage. We need to have storage that we can change. We can make it built-in, middle memory chip, or plug a cable onto it and just, Velcro a hard drive on the back or a solid-state drive. We need it to record whatever frame rate we want because we need it to work. No matter what the excuse is. Oh, it's in some German format. I don't care. I can convert it. And the battery pack life has to be dynamic. It should work for the 5 seconds we need it during a crash, maybe. But we should also be able to plug it into a cigarette lighter or an external battery. Now you see where I'm going here. It takes us into the realm of a general purpose, useful for, a jack-of-all-trades type camera, but really not specific for any one. The closest we get is actually not a body-worn camera or a baby monitor or a sunset camera, weather monitor camera. We are ending up dealing with something that's this non-specialized item that became popular a couple of years ago. And it was the camera kit. It included a battery that had a really long shelf life and was ridiculously durable. It didn't matter what its capacity is. It just had to hold electricity for a few seconds, but it would hold it for about a half hour, an hour. The memory chip on it had the peculiarity of being very durable. You could re-record over it a lot. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But you could plug in a cable and it would dump it out to a completely different recorder. And it would connect to an external battery. So you could use it for a webcam by plugging it into your computer and using your computer as the drive. You could plug it into a cigarette lighter and use it as a car cam or dash cam. You could wear it on your body and just stick it, because it was so tiny, onto the battery and onto the hard drive and just dump it in here. Or just put a little battery pack with it to add extra. The battery acted as a buffer for electricity, and the memory chip, not a flash memory, the memory chip acted as buffer because it was a static memory. These were made to be visual systems for quadcopters and drones people were setting up to do point of view video. They were used to put into really tiny RC cars with a little transmitter so you could drive literally a Hot Wheels sized car around your house chasing the cat. There's lots of videos of that. Putting them into toy airplanes to fly around so you could have the first person view. You can see them used in a sport where you fly high performance drones. And these are still available. And they were sold as keychain cameras or spy cameras, but really it was just the parts you would use to make those things, taken out of the case, and with all the buttons and all the connectors made available. And they're not that expensive. And you would think a company like Axion would just use that instead of the crappy body cam, the chin cams we all saw. Now let's talk about that wraparound effect. The fisheye lens is used to get in everything in the environment. But if it's cheap enough, why not have a second video pathway to where it records narrow angle so we get a flat image so that we can set it up to the stratosphere and prove the Earth is flat. Unless you squint, and then of course, Do we need autofocus cell phone cameras or just cameras that do a decent job and either don't distort but get a narrow view, or do a wider angle and can distort a bit and then you can compensate for it? The only way you can compensate for any of that, clean it up, or try to enhance it, is if it's shooting very high dynamic range capability, possibly, and as wide as possible. You can always correct it, but it has to be high res. It can't lose data. It can't have a random glitch where it just screws up the video. And now we get to the memory chips. Every recording media, whether it's an audio-video recording on magnetic tape, whether it's stuck on a disc as holes punched in it, like we have for a DVD or audio CD, or recording on a record player. Yes, there's a video imaging format that does that. Several of them, by the way. Or if it's memory chips. All of these inherently are not digital and also not perfect. In the case of your memory chips, unless they're specifically designed to have a coercive power source like a static memory chip will do to force it to be a 1 or a 0, it's not either of them. It's somewhere in between. One of the methods for retrieving information from SIM cards and memory chips is to sand off the surface and change the voltage feed and bias voltage in the chip to force that ambiguous number to be a 1 or a 0 and hope that you get it right. The reason for that is that they're not made of quanta. They're made of lots and lots of grains of particle, just like film is. And it is a kind of a compromise, a statistical likelihood of being dark or light, yes or no, 1 or 0. And they don't always work. So that last part about the memory card, you can use a solid-state drive. The types that have the highest reliability don't cheat and use the analog portion to store more than 1 bit per cell. They use 1 bit per cell, and they're also very large. You write over it. You never erase until you fill the whole thing up. Then you erase it and start over. When you're done, when this information's weeks old, so that it never overwrites the area twice or 3 times or 4 times. It overwrites the whole thing evenly and then writes over it again. Or you use a hard drive, which is slightly better at it, but not if you're going to have action cams. The camera has to be high resolution. The lenses should have the wraparound fisheye effect, but also be able to disable it by using a different lens. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is not using something off the shelf, but doing it a DIY or roll your own. This will be prefacing for another video, maybe on another channel, concerning a certain pair of channels that won't analyze the subject well enough. I'll be linking to this video. This is a basic discussion that I'm going to call Waptec tries to pick the perfect camera and tries to debunk the truthers who don't discuss this giant elephant in the room. Make and model of what you got your data from. If you don't know what it is, say so. That should be a sticking point for you. Should we make our own? And why don't UFO researchers know this and do it? We've had this available for a long time, a lot longer than this. Even when film was out. No, seriously, why don't they ever use optimized equipment for looking for little wispy things in space? Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.